của cả ba nước mới được chép trong sách Hán Thư của Phạm Diệp hay sách Đường Thư của Tống Kỳ. Nhưng trong các trường hợp ấy, những việc của Trung Quốc thì được ghi chép tỉ mỉ, việc của nước ngoài thì chỉ được họ chép sơ sài, không thể đem tất cả các sự thật của ba nước chúng ta chép vào đó được. Hơn nữa, sách cổ ký có văn từ thô lỗ, cộc cằn. Sử tích thì thiếu, không thể hiện hết và không khuyên răn được cái thiện, điều ác của nhà vua, lòng trung thành và lòng tà niệm của các quan, mối an nguy của xã tắc và việc trị loạn trong nhân dân. Giờ đây, đúng lúc có được nhân tài uyên bác cùng viết nên lịch sử một nhà, truyền cho hậu thế, sáng tựa nhật nguyệt muôn đời. (2018년부터) 이제 축구가 이제 유명해져가지고 많은 사람이 한국에 대한 관심을 가지게 됐죠. 또 요새 이제 한국어를 하는 사람이 많다 보니까 이제 점점 한국어 능력이 많이 좋아지거든요. 그래서 번역가분들도 번역 능력도 많이 좋아져가지고 번역 저서도 독자를 많이 끕니다. 물론 한국 문화와 베트남 문화는 사람들이 공통점이 많다고 이야기했는데도 분명히 거기에 차이점이 있습니다. 예를 들어서 같은 유교 문화인데도 받아들이는 것은 다르기 때문에 번역가들이 그런 차이점을 모르면 번역할 때는 어렵고 오해할 수도 있거든요. 오해할 수도 있어서 그런 부분이 좀 신경 써야 하지 않은가. 그리고 한국어와 베트남어의 문법상으로 봤을 때 거꾸로 되어 있습니다. 그래서 그런 부분도 신경 써야 하고, 그리고 한국어의 특징은 수식 부분이 있는데 그 수식 부분을 주어의 수식 부분인지 또는 목적어의 수식 부분인지를 잘 구별해서 해야 하는 것 같습니다. 근데 작품에서 인간이 겪는 그런 일들을 다루거나 혹은 사람이 아름답게 살아가는 권장들을 하는 작품들인 것 같습니다. 제가 여태까지 한국 문학을 많이 번역했는데요. 제 전공은 아까 말씀드렸지만은 고전 문학이다 보니까 공부하고 이제 하다 보면은 이제 역사랑 관련성이 있어가지고 많이 읽게 되고요. 그래서 문학을 하면서 역사도 보니까 너무 재미있는 거예요. 그래서 이제 하나의 꿈이 뭐가 있냐면은 기회가 되면 한국 역사 자료들을 각 시기별로 한국 고대사부터 현대사까지 번역하고 싶습니다. 네.
In our headlines on this Wednesday, April 23rd, here in South Korea. Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok is in Washington, D.C. for a host of trade talks under multilateral and bilateral frameworks amid a lower growth forecast of 1% this year for South Korea by the IMF. The number of newborns here in South Korea rose for the 8th month in a row this past February, up over 3% on year, which in turn raised the country's fertility rate to 0.82 on year. Meanwhile, at the Vatican, the body of the late Pope Francis will lie in state at St. Peter's Basilica starting Wednesday until Friday evening, and his funeral will take place on Saturday morning. Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok is in Washington, D.C., and upon arrival there, he pledged to promote dialogue that will advance the bilateral alliance. Kim Jung-shil has our top story.
South Korea's Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok has arrived in Washington, D.C. for trade talks with the U.S. The discussions are set to begin at 8 a.m. local time on Thursday. This marks the highest-level visit by a South Korean official since the start of the Trump administration's second term.
We are here to initiate discussions that will further strengthen the South Korea-U.S. alliance. I will share the results of our talks on Thursday.
Choi's visit comes amid rising trade tensions, with the U.S. imposing reciprocal tariffs which will be imposed after a 90-day grace period, as well as 25% tariffs on steel, aluminum, and automobiles. Trade Minister An Deok-keun, on his way to Washington, expressed his commitment to addressing these issues.
In sectors like automobiles, where the 25% tariff has caused significant damage, we will work to find a solution as quickly as possible.
Minister An also mentioned that they're prepared for the possibility of a surprise appearance by President Trump, as seen in recent U.S.-Japan negotiations. The ministers will join discussions with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. The talks are expected to cover a broad range of issues, including the trade imbalance, non-tariff barriers like U.S. beef import restrictions, and even defense cost-sharing.
We are moving at Trump speed to ensure these deals are made on behalf of the American worker and the American people.
Experts in Seoul advise South Korea to take a measured approach for a better long-term deal.
We don't know if what Trump wants today, it'll be the same tomorrow. He may ask additional things in the near future. We want to make sure that if there is a deal, then it's a complete deal.
The expert also cautioned that the U.S. may be seeking a quick win for President Trump, which could lead to rushed decisions. With so much at stake, the outcome of Thursday's talks is being closely watched. Kim Jung-shil, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, in what appears to be an attempt aimed at appeasing market anxiety, U.S. President Donald Trump has reaffirmed prospects of a trade deal with China and rejected prospects of replacing the head of the Federal Reserve. Lee Soo-jin covers his latest remarks.
U.S. President Donald Trump is moving to ease investor concerns, highlighting optimism over trade talks with China while dismissing reports that he plans to fire Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. Speaking to reporters in the Oval Office on Tuesday local time, Trump emphasized that trade talks with Beijing were, quote, going well, and added once again that he maintains a good relationship with Chinese President Xi Jinping.
My relationship with President Xi is great. It's been great for a long time. We've had a very good relationship, and I think we'll make a deal with China. If we don't make a deal, we'll set it. We'll just set the number. And
he also acknowledged that the current 145% tariff on Chinese goods was high, but said that while this will be reduced substantially, it will not be eliminated entirely. The Trump administration is actively ramping up trade talks, with the White House press secretary saying his trade team would meet with 34 countries just this week and that 18 trade proposals were currently undergoing reviews.
As I mentioned, there have now been 18 proposals in more than 100 countries around the world who are wanting to make a deal with the United States of America. So we feel everyone involved wants to see a trade deal happen.
When Trump was asked whether he had plans to fire Powell, he said he, quote, never did.
The press runs away with things. No, I have no intention of firing him. I would like to see him be a little more active in terms of his idea to lower interest rates.
This marks a sharp departure from Trump's recent pressure on the Fed chair to cut interest rates last lowered in December. Just a day earlier, he escalated his criticism on Truth Social, calling Powell a quote major loser and suggesting he might remove him before his term ends in May 2026. Markets responded positively to his most recent remarks, with major U.S. stock indexes closing significantly higher on Tuesday, rebounding from Monday's steep sell-off triggered by Trump's criticism of Powell. 이수진, Arirang News.
Well, regardless of that rebound on Wall Street, the International Monetary Fund says economic expansion this year will slow sharply for most countries, including South Korea, as U.S. tariffs take their toll. Moon Hye-ryan has details.
The International Monetary Fund has sharply lowered its forecast for South Korea's economic growth amid rising trade tensions and heightened policy uncertainty. In its latest economic outlook, the IMF now expects the economy to grow by just 1% in 2025, a full percentage point lower than its January projection. The estimate was presented in the report's appendix without further commentary, with the IMF's forecast the lowest among projections for South Korea from major institutions. The Korea Development Institute forecast a growth of 1.6% for the year, while the OECD and the Bank of Korea's projections came in at 1.5%. However, the BOK said last week, following its Monetary Policy Committee meeting, that it was likely to cut its economic growth projection as it expects growth in the first quarter of the year to be lower than previously estimated. The IMF also revised down its global forecast by 0.5 percentage points. The revised outlook, with the expectation that the world economy will grow by 2.8%, reflects what the agency describes as a new high in uncertainties spurred by escalating trade tensions. In response to these volatile conditions, the IMF introduced a new forecasting method. Alongside baseline projection based on data available as of early April, the outlook includes two alternative scenarios that account for key tariff-related developments. Prior to the new tariff announcement by the United States on April 2nd, global growth was projected at 3.2%, factoring in high oil prices and U.S. trade policy. After tariff suspensions and retaliatory measures on April 9th, the forecast dropped to 2.8%, suggesting that gains from delayed tariffs are outweighed by slower growth in the U.S. and China. The U.S. saw one of the biggest downward revisions, with 2025 growth now forecast at 1.8%, down 0.9 percentage points, while China's growth forecast was also lowered to 4%. To mitigate the growing risks, the IMF recommended working toward a more predictable trade environment through regional and multilateral agreements, and stressed the importance of balanced monetary policy to maintain financial stability and anchor inflation expectations. Moon Hye-ryan, Arirang News.
In other news, more babies were born in Korea this past February on year, maintaining a promising upward trend for the 8th month in a row. Shin Se-byul covers its latest findings.
South Korea reported a rise in the number of newborns for the 8th consecutive month in February. According to Statistics Korea's data on Wednesday, a total of 20,035 babies were born in February 2025, a 3.2% increase from the same month last year. This marks the first time in 11 years that the number of births in February has gone up compared to the previous year. But the pace of growth slowed from January, when the country recorded its highest childbirth growth in recent years at 11.6%. The country's total fertility rate, the average number of children a woman is expected to have during her lifetime, also saw a slight on-year increase. It came in at 0.82, up 0.05 from a year earlier, with gains seen across all age groups, from women aged 24 and under to those in their 40s and beyond. The number of marriages also continued to climb, with 19,370 couples tying the knot in February, marking a 14.3% on-year increase and the 11th straight month of growth, the longest upward streak since records began. Meanwhile, the number of divorces dipped slightly, down 0.1% from a year earlier. Despite the positive signs in the number of newborns and marriages, one expert cautioned that the recent uptick may be a short-term trend driven more by demographic timing than a fundamental shift.
We're seeing postponed births from the pandemic now taking place, and a large cohort of people currently in their prime age for marriage and childbirth. But that doesn't mean today's young generation is more inclined to get married or have children. So it's too soon to say this is a true upward trend.
He added that fundamental issues like soaring housing costs, job insecurity, and the high cost of private education must be tackled to see lasting change. Meanwhile, despite the rise in birth and marriages, the country still recorded a natural population decline, with 30,283 deaths reported in February, a 1.3% increase on year. The population shrank by 10,248. 신세벽, Arirang News.
On the political front, the Democratic Party is hosting its second debate on this Wednesday, while the race with the People Power Party has been reduced to 4 contenders. I have our correspondent Kim Do-yeon live on the line with the latest. Do-yeon, welcome. Let's start with the events taking place at the Democratic Party.
Sunny, the Democratic Party of Korea's 3 presidential primary contestants are currently in a second debate discussing a wide variety of topics. 3 topics were posed to the 3 candidates their thoughts on the ongoing insurrectional allegations, the livelihood economy, and inter-Korean relations. At the moment, each candidate is picking their own topic to discuss with others. This comes as the second half of voting started for the primary today as well, and while the frontrunner Lee Jae-myung has 90% of the votes so far, Kim Dong-yeon and Kim Kyung-soo are looking to turn things around. In fact, what's known as the Honam region, consisting of the Jeollado provinces and Gwangju city, started voting, while the voting also opens for the capital region, Gangwon-do province, and Jeju Island tomorrow. These regions are where around 80% of the electors are from. So despite its frontrunner Lee Jae-myung racking up the 90% of votes so far, there are votes to turn things around. Candidates one by one, with voting in these regions coming up, have shared their pledges of how they would develop these regions.
Right, I see. And what's the latest at the primary election of the People Power Party, Do-yeon?
Well, Sunny, the People Power Party started its second round as well. Kim Mun-soo, An Cheol-soo, Han Dong-un, and Hong Jun-pyo a couple of hours ago came together for a media day to kick off the series of debates for this round. There will be one-on-one debates, 2 on Thursday and 2 on Friday, and each contestant picked a debate partner. Kim Mun-soo picked Han Dong-un for their first debate on Thursday, and An picked Kim Mun-soo for the second debate on Thursday. Han Dong-un and Hong Jun-pyo picked each other, making their debate a 3-hour-long one on Friday. On Saturday, there will be a 4-way debate as well. The matchup brings together a pro-impeachment contestant and an against-impeachment contestant, with An and Han being pro-impeachment and Kim and Hong being against. Do keep in mind that this round cutoff, for which the results come on April 29th, will be decided with 50% of eligible PPP voters and 50% on open survey. If a candidate gets more than 50% of the total, there won't be a runoff.
Right, I see. No runoff. Good to know then. All right, and thank you for the latest on the partisan primaries ahead of Korea's presidential election. Over at the Vatican, the funeral of Pope Francis will take place on Saturday morning local time, and starting Wednesday, his body lies in state at St. Peter's Basilica. An Sung-jin reports.
Pope Francis lies in a wooden coffin, wearing a red robe with a papal mitre on his head and a rosary held in his hands. Unlike his predecessors who were placed in a triple coffin, the Pope remains in a wooden coffin, which reflects the humble life he led. On Wednesday morning local time, the procession left the chapel of Santa Marta, the Pope's residence in the Vatican, to St. Peter's Basilica. It passed through Santa Marta Square and the square of the Roman proto-martyrs. Cardinal Kevin Farrell, Camerlengo of the Holy Roman Church, was in charge of the rite of translation, the process of translating liturgical texts. Large crowds gathered to mourn the Pope's death, carrying flowers and crosses while some prayed. The late Pope's body will be taken into the Basilica of St. Mary Major for entombment, but until then will remain in an open coffin until Friday at St. Peter's Basilica for mourners who wish to pay their respects before the funeral mass. The Vatican has confirmed that the Pope's funeral will take place on Saturday in St. Peter's Square. Royals and world leaders, including U.S. President Donald Trump, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen have confirmed their attendance. Once the mourning period is over, conclave, the process of electing the new pope, will begin. Corriere della Sera, one of Italy's oldest and most read newspapers, placed South Korea's first prefect of the Vatican's dicastery for the clergy, Cardinal Lazarus Yuhung-sik, as a potential successor. The newspaper described Yu as a member of the Folklore movement who sought reconciliation between the two Koreas. Pope Francis appointed 80% of the cardinals who will pick the next pope. Though several contenders have been brought up, it is more likely to be narrowed down in the coming days. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is visiting Russia this week for talks with President Vladimir Putin about ending Russian aggression against Ukraine. The upcoming meeting will mark the fourth between the two in recent times, aimed at advancing a peace deal between Moscow and Kyiv. Now, separately, officials from the U.S., UK, France, Germany and Ukraine are set to sit down in London on Wednesday for similar talks. As part of efforts to halt the hostilities, some sources say the U.S. may suggest formal recognition of Russia's annexation of Crimea, a suggestion that Ukraine has already rejected. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Tuesday emphasized that he was willing to talk with Russia but would reject recognition of Russia's occupation of Crimea. Back here on the local front, acting President Han Duck-soo reaffirmed commitment to advancing the ROK-U.S. alliance during his visit to the Combined Forces Command at Camp Humphreys, that is, in Pyeongtaek, earlier on this Wednesday. He sat down with Commander Xavier Brunson of U.S. Forces Korea and stressed the importance of maintaining a strong readiness posture. He also thanked troops deployed to fight the recent wildfires in the southeastern part of the country. A forum here in Seoul has brought together dozens of diplomatic and defense experts, including former U.S. government officials, to discuss regional security and stability under a second Trump administration. Our correspondent Oh Seong covers the event.
Nuclear deterrence and alliances should not be neglected but bolstered by the United States as geopolitical tensions and global conflicts continue 3 months into the second Trump administration. That's according to officials and experts at the annual Asan Plenum in Seoul. As concerns grow over the lack of messaging on Washington's security commitment to its allies, Campbell, former US Deputy Secretary of State, raised the need for confidence building, noting North Korea's nuclear threat, Russia's potential use of nuclear weapons, and the largest nuclear buildup of modern times in China.
My own view is that over time we're going to need to do more, and we're going to need to involve our key allies, Japan and the ROK, more in decision-making around military and nuclear use, much in the way we did in Europe during parts of the Cold War.
Campbell also called for Seoul to have greater representation as an addition to the G7 or the Quad, saying its contributions to global governance are dearly valued. On trade concerns, as America rolls out reciprocal tariffs against its trading partners, the former diplomat expressed optimism towards the, quote, ingenuity and the determination by Seoul's trade officials who have travelled to Washington, D.C. for ministerial consultations this week.
Lots of discussions about enhanced technology and other investments in the United States. That's very welcome to the Trump administration. More defense engagement, but also work in areas that the United States clearly needs help. One of the areas of deepest concern is our challenges in shipbuilding, both civilian and military. It is the ROK that can help us, that can work with us in very productive partnerships.
The annual discussion comes amid the need for the Indo-Pacific security architecture to evolve to meet the challenges of a new era, especially at a time marked by competing visions of order and leadership in Northeast Asia.
Highlighting 80 years since the end of World War II that liberated South Korea from Japan's colonization, Seoul's Foreign Minister Cho Tae-ho warned against naked self-interest that led to war in the past. As two key democratic players in the Indo-Pacific, Cho highlighted Seoul and Tokyo's dramatic improvement of relations over the past 3 years, saying their partnership is not a choice but a necessity. The two nations commemorate 60 years of normalizing bilateral ties this year. Amid the US-China rivalry, Cho said South Korea and Japan can encourage China's constructive role and prevent escalations in the region. Tokyo's ambassador to Seoul also called for continued trilateral cooperation with the US to strengthen deterrence and foster regional stability and prosperity. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, yesterday, April 22nd, was Earth Day. And in light of this occasion, we share with you the latest efforts by Seoul City to reduce single-use plastic waste at Hungang parks, where picnics are very popular. Our E&E files this report.
Having a picnic and enjoying food delivery, it's pure happiness. Until we realize that our Earth can't sustain this convenience forever. And as more people begin to enjoy the outdoors after a long winter, starting this month, Seoul City is working to reduce single-use waste by installing return stations for reusable food delivery containers at Hungang parks, beginning with 2 at Dukseom Hungang Park and 3 at Yeouido Hungang Park. To use the service, the reusable container option in the delivery app needs to be selected. And to return containers, simply scan the QR code on the delivery bag and drop them at the designated station. Next, these used containers are taken to the cleaning station.
Reusable containers. One concern that probably comes to mind is sterilization. Can we really trust that they're clean? Well, that's exactly what we're here to find out. Behind me, a full 7-step process ensures that each container is washed, sanitized, and inspected before making its way back to customers.
The steps include pre-washing, soaking, high-temperature washing, rinsing, drying, sterilization, disinfection, and a comprehensive inspection.
We at It's Green run the Return It service, where the containers are collected, sanitized, and returned to participating restaurants and vendors for reuse up to 300 times.
To ensure the highest standards of hygiene, ATP tests are conducted to measure organic residue and are 10 times stricter than the standard guidelines.
Since the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, food delivery has become a regular part of life. To tackle the growing plastic waste issue, we partnered with major delivery companies in 2022 to launch a reusable container service. The service is now available in most areas of Seoul, and by next year, we plan to expand it to all of the city.
For business owners, what are the advantages and challenges of using this system?
The reusable containers are not only clean, but they also retain heat well, helping to keep the food warm during delivery. However, it would be even more practical if the containers came in a wider range of shapes and materials to better suit the food.
As more services take part in helping protect the planet, our role is just as important. By recognizing the impact of our daily choices and by participating, we can become part of the change we hope to see. 이은희, Arirang News.
Unlike yesterday's rain and wind, the sunny spring weather has completely returned today. Seoul and Jeonju reached 24 degrees, Daejeon 25 degrees, feeling a little hot today. It will be as warm as 20 degrees in Seoul tomorrow with clear skies. With these warm conditions, you might wonder if the ultrafine dust or fine dust will appear again. Looking at the ultrafine dust forecast tomorrow, we'll have good levels all over the country. It will be perfect to enjoy outdoor activities. However, from tomorrow night, cold air moves south from the northeast, and the temperature in Seoul on Friday will drop to 7 degrees. Tomorrow, Seoul will start off at 11 degrees, Chuncheon and Gyeongju at 9 degrees. Highs will move up to 20 degrees in Seoul and Busan, 26 degrees in Daegu and Gyeongju. Strong winds are expected nationwide from tomorrow. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session.
How to survive in Korea. Barbecue restaurants. Step 1. Taking care of your clothes. Put your jacket in the plastic bag. Seal it tight. If the stool flips open, store your clothes inside. Wearing light colours, grab an apron. It's the best defence against oil splatter and smoke. Step 2. Bottomless side dishes. Basic side dishes at a barbecue restaurant. Eat, and eat as much as you want. Side dishes come with free refills. Oh, and if you don't see this sign, just ask, 사장님, 여기 밑반찬 좀 더 주세요. Simple, isn't it? Step 3. Grilling meat. There are various kinds of samgyeopsal in Korea. Place the meat on the grill. Turn it over when golden. And again when it looks done. Again and again and again. Step 4. Sam style. You aren't taking bites of sam like a taco, are you? In Korea, we have it in one bite. A pro tip here. Add only as much as you can handle in a bite. Gotta avoid awkward situations. Step 5. Enjoy the perks. After the meal, enjoy the perks offered as a Korean restaurant. Fabric refreshers get rid of the barbecue smell, while mint candies freshen your breath. Did you survive the barbecue restaurant? Hang on. Are you here with someone you want to impress? Then let's skip the garlic. Who knows what will happen?
Mother Earth this week sees the global community coming together to celebrate her day, while one Korean mother shares a deeply personal story about her child. With more on Press Perspective today. Welcome to Wednesday's edition of Press Perspective. It's April 23rd here in Seoul. I'm Min San-hee. It's that time of the week during which we touch upon a collection of diverse social issues here that made international headlines as well. For this, I have Celio Fioretti with French Daily La Croix here in the studio. Celio, welcome back.
Glad to be here.
I also have writer Colin Marshall with the Pundit's take on today's topics. Colin, it's good to have you here as well.
Thanks for having me.
Colin, we will start with you. So amid events to celebrate Earth Day this week, there have been a number of reports here about the extreme weather becoming a new normal for South Korea, which is also the case for quite a number of other countries worldwide, of course. Earlier this month here in Seoul, we saw the first mid-April snow for the capital city in over 100 years, I hear. What has been your experience with extreme weather here in the country?
That was striking, the return of the snow. And it was just before I left for a few weeks for Canada. So I was thinking, well, it's winter in Seoul. Then I left for Toronto and there was more winter. And then I came back and it's weather like this. It's really pleasant. Like, it's nice now. And it's easy to forget Korea has these periods when it's pleasant outside, good for walking, good for whatever you want to do in the open air, as long as the air quality is good. But Korea is known for its extreme weather. It already was known for its extreme weather. A lot of people who are not native to Korea, or even some who are, complain about the weather. It's their main problem. It's too hot in the summer, too cold in the winter. I myself, despite having moved from Los Angeles, where the weather doesn't vary that much, I don't mind it. I actually don't mind a cold winter and a hot summer, but you know, those can only get so extreme before you do start minding. And in the Korean media, there have been stories that come up every year now, it seems, tallying up the deaths that can be attributed to climate change, in the sense of, well, if there was a flood that might not have occurred without climate change, then that is counted as a climate change death if someone drowns, or heat-related deaths, or if a structure collapses because of a large snowfall that plausibly was caused by climate change. There is sort of a fuzzy border here as to what can and cannot be attributed to climate change, but I think it's the disagreements that happen over climate change are less whether it's happening than what to do about it. That's a whole different story. But I think we'll see more attention paid to these kind of stories as time goes forward. But there was a notable quote in one story, one such story from a Korean climate scientist, I believe, and he was saying, Korea is actually down to almost 2 seasons. Any foreigner living here will they'll at least smile, maybe laugh when they hear the expression 4 distinct seasons. Korea is the land of 4 seasons. They're all different. They're not the same as each other. Well, 2 of those seasons, spring and fall, seem to be getting shorter. And summer, according to this climate scientist, starts now. It runs from April through November, according to him, which seems extreme. But by that standard, we're in the summer now. So I hope you're all enjoying your summer so far in April.
Right. Celia, last year, Korea welcomed its first climate litigation ruling of its kind here in Asia, of course. Could you remind us a bit about that ruling by the Constitutional Court, including its relevance, and what revisions have been made since that particular ruling last year?
Well, about a year ago, as you mentioned, South Korea Constitutional Court made a big ruling that local climate activists called a landmark decision. The court decided that part of the country's climate law didn't protect the constitutional rights of the future generation, especially because there weren't any legally binding targets for carbon greenhouse gas emission. That, they said, unfairly pushed the burden onto future generation. This ruling came out after 4 years of legal battles, which started back in 2020 when a group called Youth for Climate Action filed a lawsuit. They argued that the government's weak climate targets were violating people's basic rights, especially young people. The case eventually brought together 255 plaintiffs, including children, babies, and even a fetus, to show how climate policy affects generations to come. In the end, the court gave the government and National Assembly until February 2026 to update the law with those long-term goals. It was a move similar to what Germany's German court had done a few years earlier. Activists said it wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a stronger push for serious climate action, and we have seen many legal action taken against states or corporations all around the globe. The number of climate lawsuits filed worldwide had reached 3,800, and 2/3 of them only in the U.S. Even though South Korean Constitutional Court made a big ruling on climate last year, the truth was that most climate lawsuits in the country still are not getting much traction in the courts or even in the government. And it's not really surprising because these lawsuits, climate-related lawsuits, are not really about legal violation. It's more about the law not being fully enforced or properly enforced. So it makes hard to really define someone guilty of a violation, a clear violation. Part of the problem was a lack of strong rules from lawmakers and government to really establish the boundaries of the laws and targets. And ironically, that's where the Constitutional Court step in to clarify the situation. In the end, climate lawsuits are not pointless, even though it's a bit hard for them. They don't always result in legal victories, but the goals are elsewhere. It's more about raising awareness to a broader audience. It could be the government, of course, but also just the general opinion to maybe be more careful about the environment for their own sake.
Right, definitely raise greater awareness and of course seek to rally greater action then with regard to climate change. So Colin, while the government here has yet to strengthen its strategy against climate change, its policy against food waste, it continues to gain quite a bit of applause, and one pundit believes that Mongolia can take a few lessons from South Korea. Do tell us a bit more about this.
Yes, this was a piece published in The Diplomat, an English language paper / website that covers certain regions of Asia, including Mongolia. And this piece, written by a Mongolian, was holding up South Korea as a model for what Mongolia can do to get more recycling going, to get its recycling programs up and running. It doesn't have anything like the scale of South Korea, and a lot of landfills are being filled there, simply being filled with no sort of additional processing, just throwing the garbage into a hole in the ground, which was the way everybody did it for a long time, was the way Korea did it, the way the U.S. did it. But that's changing with technology that makes recycling possible, reuse possible, that makes it possible to extract materials that can be reused, and so on and so forth. That keeps advancing. I believe South Korea has a target to recycle all electrical and electronic products. Both of those are covered. I'm not totally clear on the difference, by 2028. So it's ambitious. Mongolia does not quite have those same ambitions, according to this writer, but there are various different sectors in which they could do it. Mongolia it's comparable to Korea in some ways, not so comparable in other ways. I mean, it is a country in Northeast Asia. There's a big economic relationship, a strong economic relationship between Mongolia and Korea. If you go to Ulaanbaatar, you'll see many Korean cafes, you'll see Korean businesses, some of the cab drivers speak Korean. That's a sign that there is a relationship here, that the countries are learning from each other, are trading, of course, and they have things to provide to each other. But of course, Mongolia's economy is different than Korea's. It's mining, maybe the biggest sector in that country, which is not the case in South Korea. And it's 3.5 million people, which is very different as well than Korea's 50 million in a much larger land area. But it is interesting to see that South Korea is being taken as an example, and it's not a distant country. It's not somewhere in the West. It's somewhere that is more regionally suitable, I would say. And here in South Korea, it's been a sort of habit to look to countries that are too far away as examples that might not be culturally or geographically, or they might not be similar in any way. But it is heartening in a sense to see countries that are nearer to one another taking lessons from each other. And the food waste, whether it be food waste or other types of recycling, I believe 15 different materials are now legally mandated. You have to recycle them. This is something that Koreans have accepted. I think Koreans are very used to it now, even though it's only been since the 90s that this was even proposed. And they don't always love the process of sorting the recycling, but it's really been taken to heart in a lot of ways by the Korean population. Foreigners, they take a little while to get used to it, especially the food waste disposal. I don't know, it felt against nature to me at first to throw food scraps in a bag and tie it up and keep it in your house. But if you put it in the freezer, it's not so bad. That's my tip for today for recycling.
Right, we had that before as well. As Celia, speaking about food waste, how is France's fight against food waste coming along?
Well, we spoke about models and inspiring models from different countries. And since January 1st, 2024, it is mandatory in France to sort food waste at the source at home, like in Korea. The idea was indeed to get closer to the model used here in South Korea, where food waste recycling is part of everyday life. But in practice in France, things are in haven't really taken off across the country, and that's mostly because the responsibility for actually setting up this whole recycling process falls on local governments, and a lot of them just don't have the money or the infrastructure to carry on that responsibility. The law is there, yes, but without the infrastructure, it's hard to apply the law. Municipalities need to install separate bins for food waste, set up regular collection, and have facilities for composting or methanization of the waste. And all of that costs money, which a lot of smaller cities don't have. For big cities, it's manageable. But if you are a small city in the countryside with not a lot of population, not a lot of money, then it's hard to enforce the law. According to ADEME, the French environmental agency, by the middle of 2024, only about 40% of the population had access to a sorting facility for food waste, which leaves millions of people technically illegally sorting their waste because they cannot process and separate this food waste. And part of that issue is the government, the national government, didn't really invest and finance this law to help and ensure everyone in the country can get access to a facility for that. For the law to truly work, in France's case, it really needs the government to put more effort into assuring everybody can access, and for the municipalities to have the means and structure to enforce the law. We'll see if that gets implemented. There has been some critics in France pointing out this issue. The government hasn't really answered for now, but we'll see. Maybe they will wake up a bit and invest more in that.
Can we call it a work in progress for now?
It's a work in progress, exactly.
All right. Colin, let's move on to a different social issue now. Korean actress Yoon Yo-jung, she made history back in the year 2021 when she received an Academy Award for her performance. Now, she gave a very endearing speech back then. I remember her thanking her two sons for making her go out and work and to win an Oscar. Now, recently she shared a deeply personal story about the sexual identity of one of her sons. Could you tell us a bit more about that and the response?
Yes. Those of us of a certain age may remember a movie called The Wedding Banquet, which came out in the early 90s by the celebrated Taiwanese filmmaker Ang Lee. And that was a movie about a gay Taiwanese man in New York who has to put on a show that he's marrying a woman in order to set things right with his family. A very entertaining movie. Well, that's being remade, and it's being remade with Yoon Yo-jung in the maternal role, with a variety of other comedians and big stars. Directed by, I believe his name is Andrew An, Los Angeles Korean-American filmmaker, and the theme of this film, and the story adheres closely from what I understand to the original, the theme of this film is close to Yoon Yo-jung's heart, as she said, because her older son happens to be gay as well. And she said to the press, not only is she acting in this movie, and I'm sure she's going to give a very entertaining performance, as is her wont, not only did she perform in the film, she actually contributed to the dialogue by incorporating a conversation that she had in real life with this son about his sexuality. And anybody who knows Yoon Yo-jung's persona, and she's become a big star even in the U.S. I think viewers in America or anybody who keeps up with Hollywood news is well familiar with her by now. She became big from Lee Isaac Chung's film Minari as the grandmother. And she's playing, of course, a lot of grandmotherly roles given her age, but she's been in Korean film for a long time. I got to know her as the star of Kim Ki-young's films Hwanyo and Chungyo in the early 70s. The Firewoman and the Insect Woman, I think they're called in English. And these are movies of a very different tenor than the one she's starring in now, or the one she's playing roles in now. She's still an adventurous actress, but back then she was an icon of these very lurid and sensationalistic films that nonetheless are very well made. Kim Ki-young is still one of the best remembered Korean auteurs. But it's funny now to think about this because Yoon Yo-jung in her interviews about the Wedding Banquet remake, she said, oh, I don't know if this film's going to play well in Korea. It's a conservative country. It's a conservative country. Then you think of, well, Hwanyo and Chungyo are not exactly, these are not films that are necessarily to conservative tastes. I mean, these were popular movies in the 70s, but they're still daring in their way when you watch them today. But I think this might be a generational difference. I think Korea is probably ready for a film like The Wedding Banquet. I don't know how much the original was seen here in Korea, but I think the new one will probably be a success here as well. And you know, the idea of Korea as a conservative country, if you live here long enough, you realize it's a country with a conservative veneer behind which a lot goes on that you'd be surprised by. And I think the film will find its audience here.
Right. Celia, do you suppose there's a discrepancy in the coverage of the LGBTQ community between the foreign and local media?
I believe so. As Colin mentioned, on the surface it can be conservative, but there's still like an underground LGBTQ life here in Korea. But if you only look through the media, international media often spotlight LGBTQ topics with more openness, celebrating pride events, advocating for equal rights or amplifying some certain voices. In contrast, in South Korean media, frequently exhibit caution about these topics, leading to maybe a limited visibility of LGBTQ individuals and issues. This disparity is influenced by the cultural background in Korea that is more conservative than maybe we can have in the West. Instance of censorship in Korean media happened throughout the years. For example, in 2021, a performance by Lady Gaga, Born This Way, was edited during a broadcast to remove the part where she sang about drag queens, which critics viewed as an eraser of LGBTQ identities. Is not something of the past. Only in a recent speech, also made by Lady Gaga, she mentioned the transgender issues, and in the current dubbing on cable TV, it was just mentioning diversity and not pointing out to the person themselves. Similarly, same-sex scenes in movies, in international movies, are sometimes edited to maybe please more the Korean audience. But despite these challenges, it's getting better, way better actually, and faster than we thought in the West. There are signs of gradual change. Streaming platforms have begun to introduce LGBTQ characters in their drama, for example. Even in reality shows, there was in 2021, I believe, the Mary Queer, which featured gay, lesbian, and transgender people. These programs sparked conversation among the Koreans, indicating a slow shift in the public perception. Still, societal acceptance remain mixed. A 2023 survey revealed that 35% of Koreans are welcoming these new identities, sexual identities, but 43% still held negatively these sexual minorities. The limited coverage in domestic media really affects how much people are exposed to LGBTQ peoples and identities. And maybe if there is a more gradual representation, maybe people will accept it more. I think the trend these days in Korean media, we're getting on these tracks. We see more and more, so it is getting better and more on par with international media.
Right. Well, Yoon Yo-jung, for her part, she has started a social commentary with regard to that particular issue. Celia, just last week, Colin was here, and we were talking about the importance of promoting accurate information about the Korean history. Now, a recent government audit found that quite a number of Korean embassies in foreign countries have failed to correct false information about Korea and its history in foreign textbooks. Could you tell us a bit more about this reality?
Indeed, the South Korean embassies have come across a lot of criticism recently for not doing enough to correct some pretty wild errors found in foreign textbooks about Korea. We're talking about claims that Korea was once ruled by Russia or Spain, that most Koreans are still farmers, or that the country was part of Genghis Khan Empire. Even basic geography got messed up. Some textbook in the UK, Turkey and Ukraine wrongly listed Korea as a Southeast Asian country instead of East Asia. These inaccuracies were found in textbooks from 81 different countries and were flagged by South Korea State-run Board of Audit and Inspection. What's frustrating is that embassies were apparently notified a while ago about these errors, but some as far as 2021, but didn't really follow up or push for correction in the countries like they're supposed to. The audit found that several embassies like those in the UK, Laos, Hungary didn't follow up properly. Only 6 countries actually corrected the textbooks. Now the thing is, are these textbooks just minor books that you would find in I don't know, in a supermarket or a library, or are they implemented in the school curriculum? That's the big question. I think there's a lot of differences between all these books. It makes a big difference of what can be done against it, because if it's on the school curriculum, then you can actually talk to the government, and maybe it will create more of a diplomatic issue if the books are not corrected. Naturally, I think these errors don't come from a mean intention against Korea. I think it's mostly books that have been hastily made, or maybe some errors in the translation, or sometime from English or Korean to the language. But it's still what a lot of people call here a serious failure of the diplomatic corps in Korea abroad, which needs to have more effort fighting misinformation about the country. I have to say the French embassy, the Korean embassy in France is doing quite a good job, because if there's error, they quickly call the person that made the error to fix it. So I think in France, at least, they're doing a good job about it. But it's a problem we see also between Korea and Japan, when Japan published a new textbook omitting often some atrocities that were committed in Korea. The current government reacted really quickly to mention that there should be some correction now. It's up to the Japanese to change it or not. But at least it's something that Koreans are aware, and the current government here in Korea really push for it. We'll see if now that this wake-up call has been made, that maybe the embassies will follow up on this abroad in other countries.
Right, for sure, hopefully. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. Celia, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Colin, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, on that note, we end this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching, and do join us again same time tomorrow.
How to survive in Korea. Weddings. Step 0. Attire. As a guest, dress formal to business casual. Avoid wearing all white, shorts or going topless. Step 1. Arrival time. Arrive 30 minutes prior to the wedding ceremony. Too many cars, too many